Welcome to the Vaxa Bureau Intelligence Optimised podcast. I'm joined again by a good friend and colleague, Scott McKenzie from Pappas. Scott, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Todd.
Scott, you've forged your career on solving complex problems and challenges for clients. Here's one for you. How do we protect this region? How do we protect what we've got down here together, Australia and New Zealand? We've got issues with border control. We've got issues with both of our defence forces with people, platforms, direction as well.
Hey man, this a pretty big problem here that we're probably going to need a few more beers to solve, I think. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to need to work closer together, and we do work really well together. We've got a really strong history. The Anzac history that enables us to work together. We're each other's brother, which we understand each other well, and we're brothers, but we're different. We have a different culture, we have a different viewpoint, and that's cool. And as long as we understand that, so one of my observations is just sort of recently come back from Australia for a very short period of time, and Australia is a little bit more pointy-elbowed than we are here in New Zealand. And New Zealand, we probably need to sharpen up a bit on that. Maybe that's defined by our cultures of how we've sort of grown our nations, whereas, Australia's got a lot of stuff that wants to bite you and kill you, whereas New Zealand's much more chilled out and laid back. You can wander around in your flip-flops and not worried about getting dealt to out of a bush. So how do we look at the lens we look through the world? And I don't think that's going to mean, or what that's going to mean is we're not going to have a shared Anzac force in the near future. Maybe the medium term, because of how we look at the world and where we see our threats coming from, and we probably see those threats as shared, but how we trade with those partners is a little bit different, and our messaging is a little bit different. So that means we're probably not going to have that shared Anzac force. However, we're going to be really interoperable, and we're going to complement each other, and we're going to work together really well, just like brothers, do, or siblings.
But I just want to go back to a point. I have to disagree with the fact that you don't have anything that wants to bite and kill you. I've played rugby against a few New Zealand teams, and I can tell you they definitely wanted to kill us at least. Actually, they succeeded. But
hey, well, we compete really well on the rugby field and on all sporting fields, and so does Australia. Hasn't Australia done well in the Olympics this year? I think it's amazing what you guys have achieved.
100%, and that sort of leads to a point too, Scotty, is that for our populations, like we're very, very small populations in the region down here, and like you said, we do look after each other. We have for a long, long time. You mentioned Anzac is a really good case in point. You having been in the New Zealand Defence Force, myself personally having worked with the RAN, the Australian Defence Force, the New Zealand Defence Force in supporting roles as well for 20 plus years. Seeing how that interoperability works is amazing. We talked last time we caught up about shared resources around procurement, supply chain, logistics, which makes absolute sense. Given where we're at right now as well, I know from an Australian point of view, Navy and Border Force, as an example, we've now got this strategy of denial rather than deterrence. So not letting things in. The fact of the matter is, though, we're understaffed. We don't have the maritime fleet to be able to do what we need to do, given the borders and the size of the borders that we have to protect. And let alone, with our brothers in New Zealand, you look at the exclusive economic zones that we have to protect. So natural resources, including the fisheries. Like New Zealand's got one of the, in Australia, but New Zealand has one of the most valuable fisheries in the world. That's very, very important to your economy and the regional economy as well. We've seen interoperability and interchangeability when it comes to especially maritime operations. And that's the way we're heading as well. For this region, maritime is key. How do we band together, given the fleet we've got? Let's look at Navy and Border Force. How do we band together with the fleets and the people that we've got and in the culture, like you said, there's some cultural difference, to better protect what we've got?
Well, look, I think it's going to start from space, right? So because we've got such a massive coastline, or you have such a massive coastline, and that northern region, it doesn't take much to get in a boat and across those little bits of sea to Australia. And I think we only have to look at Europe as to how migration has happened across the Mediterranean and the likes to learn from them. And it's a really hard problem to solve, because it involves human beings that are looking for a better life. And some nations, New Zealand and Australia, are built on that, right? So how are we denying those people to move across? But you also got to protect your economic force as well. So I think it's got to start from space and understanding that, and then using that intelligence to then drive where you put your forces, and then how you work together from there and do that in a way that is has some level of compassion in there, is going to be really difficult. But you have to sort of really help out those nations that are on your doorstep to nation build at the same time, to give them that economic prosperity, to stop them wanting to look over the fence and jump into our backyards and exploit that as well. So no real deep answer there, but I think exploit the space element, information sharing, which we do so well in the Five Eyes, and then coming down to what is the best platform to get out there and provide that deterrence. And I think that's got to be a combination of unmanned. So the unmanned arena is just exploding in the ISR environment, which has data and bandwidth issues and information and sharing issues. And then how do we get the speed, once we sort of see the issue coming, how do we move our forces around at speed to address that, to provide that deterrence or stop denial, etc. I think that's challenging. But you're seeing a lot of that in Australia right now. So you're seeing some really interesting elements being developed.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges that need to be solved. Here in Australia, but also New Zealand. If I was in that spot, if I was over in Indonesia or Palestine, and I was being a father and a husband, I would definitely want a better life for my family. I would definitely do anything that I to make that happen. We talked about the cultural piece as well earlier. That cultural fit's really important as well. For anyone that's I guess coming into Australia and New Zealand. Otherwise, you see divide, which we're seeing in Australia, especially the last couple of years. And we've seen referendums which have created divide. We're seeing it at the moment, especially with the way that government has been processing visas for people to come into this country. Agree with you though, mate. The humanitarian piece is key. These are people. But mate, when it comes to space is key. Obviously, data. To allow for that movement control, not just to understand the movement control of people, but then where to pre-position the best assets, utilising the best strategy as well. It's not just about assets and force projection, but it's about understanding what we can better do to protect the region and those people who are seeking asylum. Whether we're talking about people, but also we talk about illegal fishing as well. It's a massive problem down here. We need to protect those economic assets for Australians and New Zealanders. Uncrewed systems are huge, especially with aerial systems at the moment. But you look at the VBAT, which a good friend of ours, as you know, Colin Gund and the guys in Toll Uncrewed System, working very closely with Shield AI out of the US. They've developed an amazing platform that is easily transportable, doesn't need too many people to operate it, can launch vertically off the back of Armidale class, Cape class, very small inshore patrol vessels, off of our Anzac class frigates. It then also takes away from the need to have to deploy the P8s, the Poseidons, to do just the coastal surveillance when they should be out further afield, doing work, especially when it comes to, you talked about Five Eyes earlier, with our Five Eyes partners in New Zealand, the the US especially. We'll get to this in a minute as well around what a US election might mean to border security and regional security. But the unmanned systems are key, and they must be utilised more efficiently and effectively, in my view, to one, free up resources to do what they need to do and what they're designed to do, but also to support the outcome.
Yeah, without a doubt. And look, I think, the VBAT is a great example where, it's sort of SpaceX-ish, isn't it? So we other and get out. But those are sort of your forward-looking eyes. And then you deploy the P8 and use those hours really effectively to prosecute a target or provide a bit more of a deterrent. So that projects that what you want to project forward. And I think that's how those little pieces all start to work together. They're not going to work together well initially. We want them to share information and transfer data at speed to give a better picture. That will happen. It'll be clunky at first, but that's okay. So how do you smooth that out? And I think that's where you guys come in with your data management and understanding that as well. Will enable those projecting the right asset at the right time really well. I think just want to touch on that division piece, which you see in Australia and New Zealand. And one of the elements I think that we need to be really aware of is the psyops that's happening, and it's happening right underneath our noses of the youth of today with some of our social media platforms. And interestingly, in Australia and New Zealand, are starting to work really closely with that, but we have very few psychologists involved in that realm. And I think that's something that we need to think about, having the organisational and the clinical psychologists in those intelligence and cyber warfare systems to make sure we understand what is being projected into our countries today, because that is really going to increase that division if we don't combat that really well.
You touched on a really key point on what that means and how that can affect an outcome as well. It's really critical.
In short, sort of decade bursts, whereas other countries around the world think in centuries, right? And so when you want to influence, how do you influence the best for the outcome that you want in 50 or 100 years?
Well, that's right, mate. It's a bit like diplomacy. Diplomacy is more seduction than sledgehammer. Very similar to psyops. But you're right, but our political cycles in Australia and New Zealand don't allow for that forward thought. We've seen it with procurement, with defence procurement. Is a really good example. We need whether Australia or New Zealand or Australia and New Zealand, we need to be on the same page, with that 50 to 100 year strategy, like our neighbours to the north. And that it's a very, very patient game. It's a very patient game. We don't do that well. We jump at shadows when it comes to procurement. We jump at shadows when it comes to policy. Now, I get there's left and right in politics, and there's somewhere in the middle as well. But if we're going to really create a prosperous region in Australia and New Zealand for our future generations, not just our kids, Scotty, but their kids, and their kids after that, it needs to start with that believe and belong in what we're trying to do, creating legacy, nation building, region building. And speaking of which, we've got a federal election out here, which will probably come later this year, is my prediction. I don't think the current government's going to hold on. They're not doing well in the polls. They're on the nose already for some of the decisions they're making. They're more ideological decisions than fact-based decisions. And we saw that in New Zealand with the previous government as well. Everything was based on ideology, and it's left you guys having to mop up a terrible mess. But the US election, that's probably the biggest thing, mate, that's on the horizon. It's entertaining to watch on the box, that's for sure. I'm not going to at all put your dear Prime Minister in the same category as Donald Trump, but they're both businessmen. They both want to get things done. They both believe in their own country first. The rhetoric that he goes on with, he's talking to his voters. He's understanding. He's creating that that fever and that culture of America first, which is so important. But mate, that election's coming up. What do you think that'll do for our region?
Hey, look, I think for our region, we're not the focus of America at the moment. So as you know, all of the trade happens really with our closest partners. So for the States, it's Mexico and Canada, and of course across a little bit to China. But then sort of South America for us, we trade heavily with each other, and then in through the Southeast Asia. So that's probably going to be a bit of a focus. I think, when you look at the way that Trump wants to, and I'm not a political guy, to be honest, but he really wants to control the decision making and get faster decision making, and so the bureaucracies that are there in the States, slow down that decision making for him. Whereas Kamala Harris and the Democrats, they want to keep a bit of status quo, the classic world order, and diplomacy element, which I think, so we won't see much of a change if they come in.